So let's deal with the review on bicycles. Um, which of the following lists the vehicles in order of increasing stability in a high-speed turn? So the first one is SUV, car, motorcycle. Again, it's in order of increasing stability. SUV, motorcycle, car, motorcycle, car, SUV, motorcycle, SUV, car. Clearly, the issue here is that things become unstable when you have an SUV, which has a very large, high center of mass off the ground. So the higher that center of mass is, then the more likely that when you're turning around it, say you're making a higher speed turn to the left, or rather to the right, the way I'm drawing it, sorry about that, then there's friction which tends to want to rotate the vehicle counterclockwise. So again, if you turn toward the right, you'd have a tendency to want to flip over to the left. The higher that center of gravity is, the worse it gets. So clearly an SUV is worse than a car. And so if you want to go into increasing stability, it should go SUV then car. And so the real question is, well, what's the difference between a motorcycle? In fact, this is the appropriate answer. A motorcycle, on the other hand, when you say you wanted to make a right-hand turn, is you would actually be just like a bicycle, is that you would tend to lean into the turn. So if you're sitting, on the motorcycle, you lean into the turn in order to make the right turn, because the issue is that if you got the friction against the road, which tends to want to move you towards that direction, and you have the normal force, the idea is that the sum of those two forces gives you a net force, which acts directly through the center of mass, and so you're actually really quite stable. And so a motorcycle is just fine. More stable than a car, actually. It is important for cyclists to lean their bicycles when negotiating sharp turns because the torque created by their leaning balances out the frictional torque from the road, which would tend to flip them. The torque created by their leaning balances out their weight and holds them up. Their tires flatten out, thus getting better traction on the road. They increase their static stability. Clearly, static stability doesn't matter. And the torque created by their leading balances out their weight and holds them up. That's not really true either. Whereas really the idea is that the torque created by the leaning balances out the frictional torque from the road, which would have tended to flip them. This is somewhat more accurate. So this is the right answer. Number 3. The higher you stand up in a canoe, the higher the overall center of gravity rises. Eventually, the canoe becomes unstable and tips over at the slightest disturbance. That instability developed as soon as 1. The overall center of gravity no longer rises during a tip and instead descends during a tip. The buoyancy force exceeds your weight. The canoe's gravitational potential energy exceeds its kinetic energy. The net force on the canoe stops rising, instead begins to decrease. And again, as we talked about for static stability before, is what you want is that you want the center of gravity. Say, for example, if you have, a chair just sitting on the floor, as you rotate it, then what happens is that the center of gravity also goes up as the chair rotates. And so then when you release it, it tends to come back down again. And so the point of stability is that the center of gravity always rises during the tip. If you have a board, for example, This doesn't happen. The center of gravity is here. And so as the board goes, then the center of gravity also goes down with it, so it tends to flip over, falls down. And so canoe, if you get high enough off the canoe, then it becomes unstable, and so the overall center of gravity no longer rises but falls. Four. When a sport utility vehicle, SUV, makes a sudden left turn on the highway, it's danger of flipping over. One valid explanation for this effect is the SUV's angular mass increases as it turns, and its angular momentum decreases. A transfer of the angular momentum from its wheels to its frame then causes it to begin rotating, so it flips over. The centrifugal force on the SUV as it goes around the turn tends to push outward on the top of the SUV. The wheels are held in place by friction, so only the top of the SUV accelerates outwards and it flips over. 3. The leftward frictional force that causes the SUV to accelerate leftward during a turn also exerts a torque on the SUV about its center of mass and can cause the SUV to undergo angular acceleration and flip over. The force of the SUV's momentum pushes it forward while the force of the road pushes it to the left, and these two forces twist the SUV so that it goes angular acceleration and flips over. And again, if you have a SUV which is on the road, you want to turn to the left, and so the centripetal acceleration is to the left. The weight's downwards. You have basically support forces against the road. But really, if you don't turn right, then you would go off the road, or at least skid down the road. And so the only forces that really help you are these frictional forces. But because the center of mass is up here, that tends to want to rotate the car outwards this way, and so it will tend to flip over to the right. So the only thing that really happens like this is the leftward frictional force that causes the SUV to accelerate leftward during this turn. All right, number 5. Sailing ships that once transported tea from China were unstable in bad weather because the tea doesn't weigh very much. That's why they often carried an additional cargo of heavy china. Placed deep in the bottom of the ship, this heavy ballast ensured that the ship was in stable equilibrium, because any tipping would, and again this is stable static equilibrium. If you have a lot of ballast at the bottom, just like the clown, that you can tip over, the idea is that you put the center of heavy weight down at the bottom, and so no matter how the clown tips, basically the center of mass tends to rise, which brings it back. So the point is that you're in stable equilibrium because any tipping of the ship would raise the ship's center of gravity and increase its total potential energy. So the center of gravity goes up, and so that tends to increase its total potential energy. So if you had a ship you had a sailing vessel. The idea is if you put something really heavy down to next to the keel, then you could have all sorts of light stuff up here, and it wouldn't matter. The heavy stuff, no matter how it tipped, then it would tend to raise the potential energy, and so it would tend to come back. That ends the discussion here.